I'm about to list some movies that were released very recently that ended up playing to rows upon rows upon rows of empty theater seats from day one. Studios greenlit these projects, spent millions, secured A-list talent, then watched them die silently in empty theaters across the country. Real money, real stars, real theatrical releases, all of them drowned without making a sound. And with some of these movies, you're going to discover the real question isn't why they failed, but how they convinced a studio to spend millions of dollars to make them in the first place. Starting with one movie that flew so below the radar, even I hadn't heard of it until one awesome person left a comment about it under one of my videos. I'm talking about The Carpenter's Son, a Nicolas Cage horror movie about Jesus fighting Satan in the body of a teenage girl, and nobody even cared enough to be offended. Nicolas Cage starred in a 2025 supernatural thriller about teenage Jesus discovering his powers. The film was written and directed by Lotfy Nathan, who leaned heavily into his Orthodox Coptic Christian upbringing to tell the story inspired by the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, an apocryphal text about the early years of Jesus Christ. Now, this obviously had a lot of controversy built in. The film presented a biblical narrative from a very different perspective that is not accepted by the majority of Christians. And it depicts Jesus committing sins and being tempted by Satan, portrayed as a teenage girl. But you know what? Somehow studios were willing to take the risk, most likely in the hope that any controversy would just give the movie lots of free publicity. The film cost $10 million to make and was first released in the United States on November 14, 2025. Now, given the sensitive subject nature of this film, the studio was anticipating a lot of controversy and attention, but what it got instead was complete indifference. The movie opened to just $96,081 on its first weekend. And at the time of recording this video in late November, it hadn't done much better, only earning $141,000 in total. The Carpenter's Son only has a 3.9 score on IMDb, with the major consensus being that the movie was boring. This is despite a young Jesus getting into a fistfight with Satan, who is in the body of a teenage girl. And the few people who actually showed up to watch it reported walking out of the theater unsatisfied. Now, yes, there was a handful of Christians who raised concerns about its portrayal of Jesus, and some of them even called it blasphemous. But given the absolute box office massacre and the tiny number of people even discussing the film, the avalanche of controversy the studios expected never came. And the internet outrage it was supposed to ignite never materialized. The movie instead just seemed to have left anyone who watched it feeling bored and unsatisfied. A big, bold, beautiful journey. When Sony was ecstatic to win a $50 million bidding war, but then spent the next 12 months discovering exactly why nobody tried to outbid them. In February 2024, Sony Pictures spent $50 million acquiring the worldwide distribution rights to A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey at the European film market. The package already had Margot Robbie attached, fresh off her billion-dollar Barbie success, and Colin Farrell coming off The Penguin. Deadline described it as one of the market's hottest deals, with Sony beating out multiple bidders to secure the deal. But then Sony would go on to spend the next year discovering exactly why nobody else wanted to match their $50 million offer. The film followed Sarah, played by Robbie, and David, played by Colin Farrell, as single strangers who meet at a mutual friend's wedding and through a twist of fate find themselves on a fantastical adventure where they get to relive important moments from their respective pasts. The movie was directed by Kogonada, the critically acclaimed filmmaker behind After Yang, and it had a stacked supporting cast. Also, aside from having one of the biggest actresses on the planet coming straight off her billion-dollar Barbie movie, the timing seemed perfect too. Anyone But You with Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell had just made $220 million worldwide on a $25 million budget. And The Lost City pulled in $192.9 million on a $68 million budget. So this really looked like the safest bet in Hollywood. It's also important to know that the $50 million Sony spent only got them the right to distribute the film. The production of the movie was a completely separate $45 million, financed by a company called 30 West. So Sony paid $50 million just for distribution rights to a movie that cost $45 million to make, making the total upfront investment $95 million. But the $95 million bet started to unravel the moment audiences saw the first trailer. The first thing people noted was the obvious age gap between Robbie and Farrell, with many potential viewers turned off by the fact he looked more like her father than a believable love interest. And then the movie was released. A big, bold, beautiful journey was projected to open between $8 and $10 million. But it opened to $3.5 million domestically, finishing in sixth place. And this was during a very slow weekend, with basically no direct competition. And that was just the opening weekend. By week 2, the bleeding accelerated dramatically. The earnings dropped by more than 60% to $1.25 million. And by week 3, 93% of theaters had already decided to stop showing it because that's how badly it had performed. By the end of its theatrical run, it earned $22 million worldwide against $95 million. And by the way, that upfront investment doesn't even include any marketing costs. So Sony had fought off multiple bidders to secure distribution rights, convinced they'd won the lottery with post-Barbie Margot Robbie and a movie released at a time when other rom-coms were literally printing money. But the reality was they'd actually just won the right to watch $95 million disappear in 3 weeks. Locked, the movie that proved something fundamental had changed in March 2025. Bill Skarsgård in early 2025 was riding high off the commercial and critical success of 2024's Nosferatu, which, according to Wikipedia, made around $180 million on a $50 million budget. And Anthony Hopkins brings instant credibility to anything he touches. Put them together in a contained thriller produced by Sam Raimi, who is the director behind Evil Dead, a legendary cult classic horror movie. And you'd think that's a recipe for at least a modest amount of success. The premise was straightforward. Eddie, played by Skarsgård, is a petty thief and deadbeat dad who breaks into a state-of-the-art SUV only to get trapped inside and toyed with by the sadistic owner William, played by Hopkins. A psychological, confined space cat-and-mouse game thriller that has always been the smart play in Hollywood. Because of its limited location, tiny cast, tight budget, and high profit potential. Phone Booth cost $13 million and made $97 million. Buried cost $3 million and made $21 million. The formula works because the overhead is so low that even moderate success equals profit. The movie was a remake of the Argentine thriller called 4x4 from 2019, a film that almost no one had seen or heard of, and only made around $1.2 million on a $3 million budget. And the timing couldn't have been worse. March 2025 was one of the worst periods at the box office in many, many years. The domestic market for that month grossed just $416 million, which was down an incredible 45% from March 2024. Major releases like Mickey 17 and Snow White became massive flops, and even Captain America: Brave New World struggled despite topping the charts. And then here comes Locked, getting released in the United States on March 21st, 2025 by U.S. distributor The Avenue. It reportedly cost around $20 million to produce, and by the end of its theatrical run, the film grossed $1.6 million in the United States and Canada and $2.5 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $4.1 million. $4 million against $20 million? That's an 80% loss before marketing costs are even factored in. A contained thriller format that's supposed to be low risk and high reward instead became a throwaway movie that couldn't even crack $5 million worldwide. Two talented actors, a proven producer, a simple high-concept premise, and a genre that's historically been profitable, but $4.1 million said absolutely none of that mattered. After The Hunt, when Julia Roberts was paid 3 times more than her movie's entire global box office take. After the Hunt follows a college professor played by Julia Roberts at a personal and professional crossroads when a star pupil levels an accusation against one of her colleagues, another professor at the college played by Andrew Garfield. And the movie was directed by Luca Guadagnino, a director famous for his critically acclaimed dramas. So, conservative estimates suggest that After the Hunt cost $70 million, but the real number is likely closer to $80 million. And that's where things get very strange, because there are no special effects, no CGI fight scenes, and there are no expensive set pieces or locations. The cinematography is competent and well done, but by no means extravagant. In fact, the movie is a drama set primarily in university faculty offices, apartments, and conference rooms. And there are no reports of reshoots, so it's not like they filmed an excessive amount of expensive extra footage. By all accounts, this film should have cost closer to $40 million to make. So why is the final budget $80 million? Well, Julia Roberts alone earned $20 million for starring in the film. That single paycheck accounts for a quarter of the film's total budget. And then you add Andrew Garfield and Io Edibiri's salaries plus Michael Stuhlbarg and Chloe Sevigny in supporting roles, and the cast alone likely consumed the bulk of the budget. You see, Amazon was happy to pay the extravagantly high star salaries as part of its prestige push in order to compete with other streaming platforms like Netflix, who routinely invest in original Oscar-winning films like All Quiet on the Western Front. And After the Hunt was positioned as an awards contender, with Amazon MGM Studios hoping Roberts would earn yet another Oscar nomination and the movie would get awards recognition for dealing with a difficult subject matter. So you had the A-list director, the A-list ensemble cast, and the awards ambition. But let me tell you what happened when all of that expensive star power, massive budget, decorated director, and prestige met the reality of the box office. The movie grossed just $7.1 million worldwide during its entire theatrical run, and only managed to get a Rotten Tomatoes score of 37% from critics and 38% from audiences. After reading a bunch of the reviews, the bottom line is that the few people who turned up to watch this movie found the movie morally ambiguous and were not happy with its conclusion. But when it was all said and done, Amazon essentially spent lavishly on talent, only to discover that most people have zero interest in going to the theater to watch a 2-hour-long Me Too drama.